Trailer for Liberated. Is that what we're going to do? So one thing that she's worked on is a I don't know, it's a documentary. Is that what you call it? A documentary on Netflix. So we'll show a trailer for it. Just to forewarn you, it's a little bit rough, but she'll explain that, and she'll explain why you do what you do. All right. So Morgan, where are you from?
I'm from Toano, Virginia. Really small, middle nowhere place in Virginia. Got some Virginians here? Woo! Nice.
The military kid.
It's a great state. It's a great state.
All right. So tell us about a DTS? Like first let me ask this. How did you get saved?
Oh.
I figure like throughout eternity, I'm going to sit on a rocking chair in heaven, and I'm going to ask people like, tell me what kind of grace he had in your life. Like, what kind of good thing did he do to bring you to himself? I love hearing about the mercy and love of God. So tell us how you came to know the Lord.
That's such a good question. So I grew up in a Christian family, so I was exposed to it there. But then in high school, it was required reading to read Siddhartha. It's the journey of Buddha into becoming Buddha. And then I got confused because I thought all religion are just, charismatic men that people decided to follow, and I lumped Jesus into that. So I was like, Muhammad, Jesus, Buddha. So I got really confused. Then I found myself on a DTS. I wanted to do the relief and development side of things. And my parents were excited about YWAM because they knew it was Christian. So I found myself on a DTS in rural New Zealand, kind of struggling with my faith. And in the teachings every week, God just got closer and closer and closer to me. And then I really just had an encounter with him that was so personal to how I would encounter him. It was really just deep revelation as he explained to me what it means to walk in faith and not have all the answers to who he is and his character and nature, but to just trust him and lean into him and how much access I can have to him. And I fully gave my life to the Lord then.
All right. So how many of you guys worked in New Zealand? Crystal isn't here right now, but Crystal, how many of you guys have worked in New Zealand or studied in New Zealand? Some of our wonderful Kiwis. So, what'd you do after your DTS?
Well, so my DTS, my outreach was in Thailand, and we were pretty much living in the red light district of Chiang Mai, if anyone's ever been there. It's a beautiful city, but the red light district is one of the ugliest things I've ever seen. And so every night, I'd be building a relationship with these women, and these men, Western men primarily around my dad's age, would just come up and shamelessly interrupt my conversation with her and arrange a price, typically around $5, to take her away. And this whole culture of just complicity for these guys, just coming on vacation there and engaging in that kind of exploitation, exploiting her, and then her just desire to be anywhere else but there and not being able to get out of the red light district. It just completely broke my heart, changed my life. So at the end of my DTS outreach, I went to the top of our, kind of hostel where we were staying, and I just cried out to God, and I was like, Lord, if there's anything that I can do to make a difference in this space, would you please use me? And I remember distinctly just feeling to look in my hands, and I was holding my camera because I was always very passionate about media, and I just felt the Lord say, use media, use this passion I've given you. So I didn't really know what to do. I had no education in media, so learned that University of the Nations had a 4-year mass media program all over the world, so that was my next step, was to do that.
Okay, so tell us about your U of N education. Why did you choose U of N? I guess maybe you said it right there, but
yeah.
If there's any more to that story, and then tell us about your U of N education.
Yeah, so the U of N...
Feel free to advertise shamelessly to these guys to get a U of N degree.
Yeah, so for media, I was looking at other schools like USC, UCLA, and every time I would comb through their programs, I just would notice we would only, the capstone of that whole 4-year degree was making a short film. which you guys already did. Like these promo videos that you've already done, it's like, that was like the capstone of a 4-year degree, and I was like, ooh. So I took one step in the University of Nations, did the film school here. By the end of the film school, in the 3-month film school, I had done my own short film, helped with 5 other people's. And then I realized, for me, I really felt called to use media to raise awareness about social justice issues specifically. So the U of N degree pushes you out into the nations. So I was in 27 nations to get my degree. Yeah, and where we were living, so we'd be studying African worldview, and I was living in a hut in Ethiopia, for a month. I would trek to our classroom, across the poverty in the downtown area, have a couple hours of classroom time, and then they're like, okay, go do your field assignment, go capture a story. So then I was off to do a story about the Rastafarians' Holy Land, 6 hours from there, and living with the Rastafarians, and it was the coolest thing. This is a quick little on the Rastafarians. So we show up, and they are in the middle of nowhere, and this is their Zion, their Holy Land. And it was 3 girls, myself and 2 other girls, and we show up and we're just fully aware of our whiteness and our kind of just vulnerability of not knowing the language. And the Rasta community is primarily male, dominated. And we were just we didn't really think this all the way through. And so we immediately get greeted by this young guy, our age. He looks like Johnny Depp, but he's Rastafarian. And he's like, hey, comes up with his dreads. And he's like, what are you doing here? And we're like, we're here to just get to know you guys, and we'd love to take some photos. And, so we got fully accepted into their culture. And then about 3 days in, we walk into this hut. They all live in huts and whatnot, and it's just full of smoke because it's Rastafarians. And I was like, oh wow, this is. And then
what is Rastafarian? So assume we don't know what is Rastafarian.
Oh, Rastafarians are like Bob Marley. Sorry, they're the dreadlocks, Jamaican. Yeah, they're really interesting people group. Ja man, yes. And they have different interpretations of the Bible. Rastafarianism kind of came out of slavery, and it was them looking at the Bible and having a different expression of that for them, in their struggle to the promised land. So it's a really kind of interesting people group. But anyways, we walk into this hut, and they're known for smoking a lot of pot. That's why I said it was filled with smoke, because Rastafarians. But so we were like, whoa, what is going on here? And it was all these Rasta men, and then I look in the corner, and there's one white dude, and I was like, what are you doing here? And he was like, what are you doing here? And he is a National Geographic photographer, really well known. And I started talking to him. He was like, I'm here on assignment for Nat Geo, and we can't get access to the women. And I was like, oh, we love the women. We've been hanging out with them, come with us. And so we helped this guy, get his story, because we had just been there a little bit longer, and just the women, we were able to really connect with them. So that was just one of the many field assignments. It was 4 years of field assignments, 27 nations. By the time I graduated, my portfolio, for media, it's really important to have your portfolio. And then I was able to do my first documentary actually through the University of the Nations my junior year. So it was a feature-length documentary, and without the support of this campus and the pioneers who've gone before us, coming around us, it never would have happened. So I can't say enough positive things about the University of the Nations.
What was that documentary you did?
Yeah, so the documentary is called Sex and Money, A National Search for Human Worth. And yeah, if you've seen it, that's amazing. If you haven't, love to get it in front of you. It had to do with sex trafficking in the United States. So yeah, it was crazy. One of our just projects for a class was to do a photo book on human trafficking around the world. And while I was researching to do that book, I found out that trafficking was happening in the United States. And the more I started to ask around, find who is in leadership in the U.S. that is involved in this, and, asked a couple people, some politicians and some advocates, and I'm like, how big is this issue? And they're like, honestly, we have no idea. At that point, the U.S. had created something called the TIP report, and so the U.S. was basically ranking all the countries in the world every 3 years on a tier system of how bad their trafficking was. And if they were the bottom of the barrel, tier 3, we would put economic sanctions on those countries. So we were using that as a tool to pressure countries that wouldn't normally care about reforming their slavery. And so it was a really powerful tool, but at that time, we weren't including ourselves. So we were ranking everyone else. We had no idea what was happening with us. So I basically asked one of the politicians, I was like, do you think it'd be helpful if someone did a documentary on this and really explored this issue and exposed it? And she smiled. She's like, yeah, that would be helpful. And I was like, okay, let me just think who I can talk to you about that. And she's like, I think you should do it. And she's like, and if you do it, I'll join your advisory board. And I was like, oh, an advisory board. That sounds like a really good idea. So it just was very organic, but I tell you what, God just, the timing was right. He wanted our nation to see that issue, so it had a full lift off and became a much bigger project.
So you partnered with Fire and Fragrance during that time also. Didn't you just tell us some of what that story?
Sure. So we, our film crew, we had been in photogenics, had been very on the justice track, and I met Andy Bird at that time, who's pretty new. He was like pioneering the prayer room back then, and he actually said to me at one point, he was like, you know what, Morgan, love what you're doing, but don't forget to keep the first commandment first. And I was like, what? What do you mean? He was like, first commandment, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. That is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And he was kind of showing me how in the justice vein, I was so broken over these issues that I had just jumped into the second commandment. Love my neighbor as myself, love my neighbor as myself. But I was, without even knowing it, tapping out of the source of his love and his grace for me personally, as well as getting his sense of justice. So I wasn't operating out of my own sense of justice. And so it brought myself and our team through this amazing season of what does it look like actually to really put the first commandment first. And so our first step very practically was to partner with Fire and Fragrance. And so we had a team of 7 intercessors who traveled with us. We did the film in 32 states. We were living in an RV, and they traveled in a minivan with us. And as we would be filming in a strip club or at like a porn expo, they were like in the parking lot just praying. And, and it was just the most amazing thing because we'd come out of there just so broken, overexposed to things, just a wreck, honestly. And we would like get in their minivan and they had just been in his presence and just could bring us immediately into encountering him and praying. So our main prayer was always, Lord, please cleanse our minds. We only want to see and remember what's important for us to get the job done. Please erase our minds. And he did. The Lord clearly did. I mean, for our whole team over and over again. And I'll just say real quick, so we did 2 different tours of filming, and they came with us both times, but by the end of the second one, they were like, could we actually go in with you? Could we be on set while you're filming? And I just thought, we'd love that, but because we're interviewing survivors who've been trafficked as children and just pimps and traffickers, we have to keep it really small crew so they don't feel intimidated, they can be themselves. And so I said, well, if you could learn how to use some of the film equipment, then we could just have you in as some of the filmmakers. So they did. A handful of them learned how to operate the booms and do the reflectors and really get hands-on so we could have intercessors on the set. And that's how we did it. And then when the film was done, we did a 50-state tour piled back into a bigger RV at that point. And wrapped in this like sex and money merch and did all 50 states. And at that point, you couldn't tell who was who. You couldn't tell if it was Revival and Rev, Fire and Fragrance intercessors or the Justice Track people. We were all one. We all wanted revival. We all wanted reformation. And that was a lifestyle. So
we show a trailer of Sex and Money. Is that all right? It's on IMDb.
IMDb.
Yes. International Mission Board. Is that all right? Can we put this up? Is it coming up?
No spoilers.
Any story you want to tell from while we're waiting?
From the trailer.
From the trailer, from the filming, from the results of this, or
Right.
some of the impacts of it.
Well, the wild side, we
Get into current affairs because I want to stay.
No. Tell us the wild side.
Oh, okay. So yeah, we did this 50-state tour. We just thought grassroots distribution. This is our first time attempting a film, and one of our strategies that the Lord gave us was to specifically reach the government and to reach the church. So we had to narrow down the spheres. So we did 2 screenings per state, one at a university where we'd bring in, we kind of use them as like a think tank. So we'd have a panel after the screening with key leaders in that state. So it's typically local law enforcement, FBI, a survivor from that area, a prosecutor, victim services. So in that moment of impact, after the audience saw the film, they could ask questions and interact with those key leaders. And we partnered with the state grading system that this organization was releasing. So like if a state got an F on the report card, they were given an assessment of how to improve that grade within a year. So it was like to activate those different states to make a tangible difference. And then we did a church screening where we prayed for revival and reformation in each state. But by the end of it, what blew us away was our first corporate screening licensee was the FBI to use the film to train law enforcement, and then it trickled into local law enforcement, and then it got picked up by other like organizations and universities like Harvard, Yale, a bunch of schools. So we were just so blown away. We really had no idea that it would be used so practically, but God, again, God was up to something. So.
Wow. All right, let's take a look at it.
Have you ever heard of the issue of human sex trafficking?
I try not to get into current affairs because I want to stay happy and stupid.
Have you heard of sex trafficking? Do you guys know what that is?
I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't think it's going on today in our modern society. I would hope not.
Sex and money, they go together.
Yeah, I know it still goes on. I know it's dumb.
There's just been an acute awareness of trafficking in places like Asia or Eastern Europe, and nobody thinks that slavery is happening in the United States, in their city or their suburb or their small town.
12 and 14 is the average age that a young child can become active in this terrible abuse.
I thought I was the only 12-year-old. I was told to lie and say that I was 16 years old.
I was 14 years old. He took me from here to California.
They're supposed to be, at this age, in a loving, comforting home environment, and instead they're with pimps and johns and in dangerous places where they're raped and abused.
It functions like a very sophisticated business.
None of my girls could ever come in with less than $500. I was getting $3,500 a night, 6 days a week, so whatever that is.
There are at least 100,000 American kids a year who are the victims of child prostitution and child trafficking. The only way not to find this problem in any city is simply not to look for it.
In 2007, we went on a trip around the world, and we were studying social injustice and how to raise awareness. So when we were writing the book, we realized that there was trafficking in America. So we're literally getting into a 32-foot motorhome and traveling across the country to see how big this problem really is and what we can do about it.
To be told that there's prostitution taking place in massage parlors is different, I think, than going in and actually seeing the massage parlors. It is unsettling.
I think that's the manager? Yeah. Okay, you get the $5 discount, $35 per person.
Our girl was only maybe about 12 or 15. You can drive to the restaurant.
I made me cry.
I actually ran away from home. men would come in the house and give the other man money when they were just raping.
The man who wants to have sex with a child is pretty much 95% married, 75% white.
Look at that little daughter. 100% of the funds come to me if you're a real parent. Just some feed them, keep them broke.
Makes you feel really kind of icky, doesn't it? But that's how the game goes.
So not the lightest topic, but again, that's why it was so heavily on the Lord's heart. And one of the most amazing things for me and for our whole team was to see how the Lord would bring the right people to the audience, you know, to watch the film, and then we'd get letters sent in saying, like this one woman who is a social worker, she had no idea that these kids had nowhere to go. So even if law enforcement found them, they had no safe place to put them. So she started an organization called Unlikely Heroes, and she's built 7 homes for these kids. And so I think it's around several hundred every year who are able to find temporary placement and wraparound services from her just rising up to make a difference. So it's just been really amazing to see what's come from the film.
Is that the lady who came to teach also with you in the communication school? Or is that's a different organization?
Yeah.
Right. All right. If we wanted to watch this movie or they wanted to watch it, how would they find it?
Yeah, you can go to sexandmoneyfilm.com, and we are actually in the process of updating it because we're about to hit our 10-year anniversary, which is so crazy. So we're going to update the stats and, you know, just go in and do a little bit of cleaning up, you know, of the film, things we would do differently now because the subject matter has evolved over the past 10 years. So you'll see it in social media channels and larger distribution in 2019.
2019. All right. By the time you're here, will it be? You come back in.
I come in May, so we'll be in the edit at that point,
right.
But it won't be done.
Won't be finished. All right. If you need a test audience for your edit, you know, just saying. All right. So take us on your journey from after Sex and Money to at some point. Take us to how you got involved in Liberated and.
Yeah, so after Sex and Money, we realized that we had just started. You know, I thought at first when I started Sex and Money, I was like, we'll just do this film and then it'll be on to other things. But in just making that one film, we realized how massive this issue of human trafficking is all over the world. And in order to really make a difference, we have to address the demand side because trafficking is a supply and demand issue. If people were not buying, women and children would not be sold. So we had to understand, how do people become buyers? It's not that they're born that way, right? They don't just wake up one day and say, I'm going to fly all the way to Cambodia to try to have sex with a child. So we went on this journey. If you're familiar with Exodus Cry and the film Nefarious and that team, they aren't. They aren't. Oh, okay. It's an amazing organization, anti-trafficking organization. And we knew each other because they were doing this film Nefarious while we were doing Sex and Money. So we were friends and, you know, just kind of high five along the way. And when we were done with our film, the founder of Exodus Cry just called me and he's like, hey, do you want to just merge teams and work together on this? Let's really go after demand. Let's go after the sexualization of culture. And I was like, yes. That was so clear through our whole journey on our team. So when he called, we were better together, clearly and truly. So that was about 6 years ago. And so we've been on this journey. We've shot 5 different documentaries in those years. And the first one up was this documentary, Liberated, that gets into hookup culture today and how this environment of casual sex is making the landscape of sex very dangerous. And the role of consent is so blurred for young adults today that it almost doesn't exist. Women don't realize when it's been pushed, you know, men have pushed past that. Men don't realize that they're pushing past that. And so what the film does is it steps back and it explains how that happened in our culture, how the messages about what it means to be a woman in media has socialized women into becoming a hot, sex object. Like the message in media for women is to conform to this, hot sex object, and then the message to men is to consume her, to have as much sex as possible. That's what makes you a man. And then we look at how media in general is saying that sex is everything, but it doesn't mean anything. It's completely disconnected from media. So you talk about it all the time, it's in our faces all the time, but at the same time it doesn't mean anything. How dangerous that narrative is. So we basically expose the cover narrative of sex in mainstream media and offer young people who engage in this kind of activity a way out. And so we named it Liberated because to be truly liberated is to know what all of your options are and then choose what's best for you and what's best for those around you. And we show how what mainstream media and culture is promoting is actually keeping them in bondage. So that's the Liberated documentary.
Okay, so is this something we could show to in church or?
So yeah, that was so our prayer, over the years for all of our films, we always ask God, who is this film for? Because I know there are a lot of media people in the room, and so you'll understand, even if your heart is to make a film for everybody, you kind of have to even narrow it down more. Is it, young people? Middle, is it parents? Are they Christian? The more specific you get, the more they'll run with what you've made for them because they feel understood, they feel captivated by your product. And so for this film, we really felt God say to make this for young adults who engage in and celebrate this culture. So for us, 4 years ago, when we came out with what we thought was the finished version of this film, we did focus group screenings with those young adults. And the anonymous forms, almost all of them said, I feel judged, I feel misunderstood, I feel misrepresented. And what we realized is we had made a film for us. We had made our version of what we thought would be an effective film to combat hookup culture. So we did 3 more full edits of the film over 3 years and continue to do those focus group screenings. And so the final version of the film is what those people, their feedback forms eventually said, I feel empowered, I finally feel free, I feel understood, I feel heard. So for those of us who don't engage in that culture, it feels like a body slam into hookup culture. But for those who this is their day-to-day, we meet them there and we help them navigate a way out, if that makes sense. So I would not screen this at a church, to answer your question, because the Christians are going to be like, this is like everything I try not to look at and I try not to, really think about. But for them, who this is their everyday, it's like what we got a picture of is it's like going into a rager party and turning on the lights. You know how that's a buzzkill? It's like you start to look around and you're like, oh, is that, there's this grime everywhere. Is that really who I was dancing with? Like, what's going on? And that's what this film is. It's like we go into the party and then we're like, whoop, and then they're just like, oh my gosh. So anyways, yeah.
Have you screened this at colleges?
Yes, so we, the craziest thing, we premiered it at a major film festival, and within a couple weeks, it was sold to Netflix. And Netflix was we knew that that's where these young people consume their media, so we were like, God, please, if it could just land on Netflix, that would be such a win. And right before the film was premiered at the film festival, the Me Too movement took off. If you all are familiar with this huge hashtag, movement of women rising up and saying, me too, I've experienced some kind of sexual intrusion or sexual exploitation in the workplace, in all these different spheres. And so it became suddenly cool to talk about hookup culture and rape culture. And so that's why our film got swooped up. So in addition to Netflix, we negotiated with them and were able to do tours. We did an impact tour earlier in this year across the US and the UK, just to get in front of young people and do impact screenings. And just a testimony, one of the main character from the film, who at that point in his life, he was fully engaging in this culture. He came on tour with us. And if we can just in this community. He fully gave his life to Christ. So he's amazing, and now he's just an advocate out there, like doing his thing in ways we never could. You know, he's talking to his peers, and it's the coolest thing ever. So
when you were here teaching that week, when we were in that classroom right over there, that you found out that that was the week he gave his life to the Lord,
gave his life to the Lord. Yeah, so we were just like, oh. Yeah, it was awesome.
All right, so can I show the trailer?
Yes.
Is it on the screen?
Is the sound still good?
Should still be up. But Davis Ball sound on. Just unplug it.
I think you're a gorgeous girl, and I'd absolutely love to do it again with you, dear. Oh, fantastic.
Want to know how easy sex is to get in America? If you want to follow me, I will show you. Well, let me show you. Whoa. It's that easy.
There's a lot of naked people and a lot of alcohol, and it's great. We meet on the beach, we get drunk, we go back to the hotel, and have sex, and we go about our lives like we never met.
When I got on stage, all I heard was cheers from 500 students.
Get wild, get crazy,
In a culture of casual sex, there are all these messages about what it means to be a man and a liberated young woman with regard to sexuality.
Today, guys rate you on how many girls you get.
This man's on like count number 4 already, I think.
To be accepted and to be well liked, you need to be new. You need to parse the line.
Jenny should get back my face on your balls.
Yeah, I don't even know where we're going. I'm hoping that we get back safely.
Do you want to see her take her top off?
Every time I go into this club, 100% some guy's gonna try and take my clothes off.
You wanted to win, right? Come on, go!
Guys up here think they can do anything.
You give them a couple Percocets and a beer and the beans drop. Usually the more intoxicated they are, the more likely they are to let you motor.
What does it mean to be masculine? What does it mean to be feminine? What is the full range of what it means to be human?
What have been some of the response when you screen it at a university?
Well,
so secular audience, right? So this is your target audience.
Right. I think the most surprising response were women coming forward afterwards or writing it on forums, you know, saying that they didn't realize that they had been raped or sexually assaulted until they saw the film. So it was so normal for them. It was just a part of their growing up in this culture that they didn't even realize you could classify those actions as assault. And then the same from the guys. We did a lot of screenings with fraternities and, you know, Greek life, that kind of environment, and they would just write in or come forward and say, you know, we had no idea that what our groups had been involved in would be classified as rape or sexual assault. And the film gets into that. What happened for us is we went to spring break to film this small little segment of get some man on the street interviews with young people today and hear their take on sex and media. And while we were there, the last day of filming, with all those people on the beach, there was a gang rape that occurred. And it was in broad daylight. There were hundreds of people around, 4 guys and a girl, and she was intoxicated. She wasn't, she was passed out. And instead of people reporting the issue, the young people were filming it and tweeting it and saying hashtag Spring Break 2013, celebrating this. They had no idea that what they were doing, that would incriminate them. And so the film gets into that. So it's the young people at the end just saying they had no idea that what they had personally gone through would be classified as that, and then how to move forward. So on all the university screens, we partnered with the rape recovery groups and sexual assault recovery groups and Title IX teams and
even Title IX team?
Title IX team. That's where they enforce stricter laws on campuses. They make the universities actually handle these cases with care for the victims, because they historically won't. They just bury it because it's bad for the university's reputation if they are known for having this kind of environment. So anytime a girl has the courage to come forward on a university campus, typically she's not believed, she's not heard, she has to prove it in a number of ways that is so further traumatizing for someone who's been through that. So these Title IX teams are present on these campuses now to protect these women.
What you see right at the very end of the trailer is somebody asking a question, what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? And just so you know, if you watch the film, there's actually, it builds that sort of having the interviews with godly men or women that have reflected on this and give profound statements, sort of builds throughout the film. So, which it's so impact. I mean, I always wonder, what does it mean to be a man, and what does it mean to be a good man? Like I just for myself, I continually ask myself that question, and I'm on a lifelong search to find out what it means. But so it's painful. You couldn't even put some footage in there, right? I mean, in the film, right? There was a young girl that.
Yeah, we had to turn a lot of the footage over to law enforcement because we weren't fully sure what we were looking at based on the laws, and so we just felt a responsibility to give it to them, and then they could, prosecute accordingly if it was criminal activity. And so, yeah, a lot of footage did not make it into the film, which is really, really disheartening. But to your point, like the film, once you're in it, our goal was for them to feel not pushed into the truth, but led, like shepherded into the truth and into. Not spoon-feeding, what does it mean to be a man, like spoon-feeding that to them, but, for them to really to be able to come to the realization themselves, which that's why it took us 5 years to make the film, because that's not an easy thing to do, and we all probably have different ways of talking about what masculinity and femininity are, and then how do you talk about it without being overtly faith-based, so that was interesting as well. Yeah, it's been a journey, and we're so glad it's out to the world now.
I'm amazed that you guys, like 3 different years, people kept responding back, we feel judged, and you'd go back and do it again. And another year, again, same response or similar response.
Yeah, I mean, it showed us how far removed we are from that culture, and in some ways,
which is a good thing.
Which is a good thing, in some ways we were like, okay, but like good. We're not, so immersed in this kind of environment that we're desensitized. There was we were sanitizing it for them as if they weren't aware of what the culture was. So yeah.
Okay, so one thing I'm going to ask you a question about the 5 other documentaries, but one thing I want you to catch is that she's involved in the field of communication with an advocacy edge, right? So youth with a mission. So her mission is to make a difference in the world, to bring the kingdom of God to those that aren't saved or those that are caught in the slavery. But she's using communication for that. All right. So Morgan, you said 5 documentaries.
Yes. So similar to Liberated, where we got blindsided, at spring break, we went into the porn industry because we knew porn is something we have to talk about. It's the through line in sex trafficking, how buyers become buyers, and it was in all these young people's conversations. It was like their sex education. So we went into the porn industry wanting to interview a handful of the main actors and actresses, company heads, agents, And we stumbled onto this massive story in our legal porn industry in LA. And basically what it is how they're making porn today. Most of it is hardcore violent, like extreme violent porn. And that's because of the addictive nature of porn. It's the only addictive substance that you don't just need more of it, you need more and different to get the same original high. So the industry has just been staging bigger and bigger train wrecks, for decades. And now they're at a point where you just have to wonder, is that even legal? And the answer is no, it's not legal. And so when we went into the industry, we're interviewing these people and they're explaining how they're making this content. And I'm just, the wheels are turning and I'm like, do they not know that this is illegal? And then we would go to legal scholars and we're like, so is this a dense question, but how are they able to make this stuff when you can't? And they're like, well, the laws are not being enforced. The way we change laws is we change mindsets. People are so wanting porn in our culture and no one is really pushing back strategically on the industry, so they're just allowed to do it. And law enforcement has so many other things to focus on that to really investigate these cases and go through all of this footage that's online. I mean, it's a big undertaking. So this film blows the whistle, like as loud as it possibly could be, that the way mainstream porn today is being produced is actually breaking laws we currently have, and it has to stop. So that's the first one. Then we have one about the sex buyers. We interviewed them and got to know them, and yeah. Yes. Yes, yeah, she's amazing. She asked if we met this woman, Shelley, who was she was an actress in the porn industry and is since out. And she does a lot about the STD crisis in the industry, and she's a really strong advocate. So we did interview her, yes. Yeah, she's amazing. So yeah, the other one is about the sex buyers, getting to know them. In this anti-trafficking space, it's like we always talk about the victims, we always talk about the pimps and the business side of it, but we never hear from these men. So this is the first film where we really hear from them and we understand their whole journey of how they became a buyer. And then once they were in that environment, how did they get out? Really important piece of that is how can we effectively deter buying? How can we bring restoration to those who are in that level of brokenness? So we have that one, and then I'm starting a new one on foster care. Foster, I know this campus is like, what God's doing here is really phenomenal, but that system is so corrupt and so exploitative for the kids. And it's a pipeline to trafficking. That's how it came on my radar. It's around 60 to 90% of the kids who are trafficked in the U.S. are from foster care. So that was the inroad, and now it's another one of those where we stumbled onto a bigger story. So that's going to be the next. That's going to be another 5-year sprint. So just started that one, but yeah.
Wow.
Oh yeah, so the one about the porn industry is called Beyond Fantasy, and we just finished, so we're in the early phases of talking to the distributors and doing the distribution side. The one on the men who buy is called Buying Her, and that one will be done in end of next year. And then the one about foster care is Waiting to Belong, and that one will come out way down the road. And then we have another one about trafficking in Vegas, about high-class escorts. But it's a lot of films. So I'm sure we'll have more time to talk too when I'm here for a whole week, which will be awesome.
Oh my gosh. I don't even know how to end this time. Like normally we would cheer for you and say, "Ladies and gentlemen, Morgan Perry," but I'd almost rather pray.
And can I just tell what the week will be?
Yeah, please.
So my favorite thing to teach on, which I'm so glad, I'm thankful for the invitation, because how do you go from having an idea, like getting a download from the Lord, like I feel called to do this project or start this business or ministry. How do you go from idea to building the strategy and the team, executing it, measuring the impact, and doing it again? So with these films, each film is like a business or like a ministry as well, because of how big the teams are and how much money, they're millions of dollars. And so what the Lord, oh man, God just does the most amazing things, like once we really press into those like practical steps. So we'll look at some case studies, not just the stuff that I'm doing, but other people you'll be aware of from the YWAM tribe, but also just businesses and other filmmakers, and we'll really learn how do you go from idea, strategy, team, money, raising the money, executing it, measuring the impact, and doing it again. So yeah, I'm excited.
Wow. All right. Guys, can we pray for Morgan? What can we pray for you for? And I'd like a few of us if we come up and gather around, or maybe all of us. But what can we pray for you for?
I'd say the biggest two big prayer requests: the Beyond Fantasy film about the porn industry. We're talking to the distributors now, and so we really need God's favor and like His clear leadership on how to get that film out to the world, and just protection from things that look good but they aren't the best option. And then for the foster care film, we're in the fundraising phase, with just as much backing as possible so we can start shooting that ASAP because it's an urgent issue. So.
Oh my gosh, guys, let's go ahead and pray for her. We'll all pray together at once, but then let's have a few of us pray out loud individually after that.
What I ask is for just an abundance of divine audiences for these films. I pray that the people in the room are the people that need to hear, that are the next politicians, that are the next, that are going out to the communities. Jesus, I ask that you